All right, I'm Matt Scholz with the Sustainable Phosphorus Alliance, and I'm joined today by three crack researchers from the NSF's Phosphorus Sustainability Research Coordination Network. On the left is Dr. Steve Powers from Washington State University, Dr. Phil Haygarth in the middle from Lancaster University, and on the right is Dr. Jianbo Shen from China Agricultural University.
Yes.
Thank you, Jianbo. So I'd like to start off by asking, well, we're covering today the Legacy P paper that you published in Nature Geosciences, Legacy Phosphorus paper, and I'd like to first ask why you did the paper. What was the importance of the work?
Well, Steve was the guy that pulled it all together in the end. He did a great job doing this. What we've done is we've studied three river basins, three really big, important river basins from around the world. And we pulled together for the first time the data from these river basins and showed the very long-term and slow response of phosphorus to move through those basins and to change. In other words, if we want to change the way phosphorus comes out of these river basins, we have to be very patient because it moves very, very slowly through the river catchment. And this is what people call the legacy effect. So what we see coming out of the river today represents the legacy of many, many years beforehand. And this data from this paper shows that for the first time.
Yeah, you picked three different river basins to look at. Do you want to explain why you picked these three and what each one instructs us?
Yeah, we picked partly it was the availability of data, but we also had a team of scientists from around the world who all could access that data together. So we picked three rivers. Now, myself, I'm from the UK, and one of the rivers that me and my UK colleagues pulled together was the River Thames. And that was the first example of the river. The River Thames, of course, flows through London, the capital city. And the River Thames, what we show in the data from the paper there with the River Thames, is we have a long-term record that goes back from the 1940s right up to present day in the paper. We've been able to analyse the data over the long term and determine that the phosphorus is declining in the River Thames as a result of long-term interventions that have reduced the sewage inputs to that river. So there's a long-term record in the Thames, and in this case it shows that interventions to reduce the sewage input have over the long term reduced the phosphorus in that river, and that's a positive message over the long term.
And when you say interventions, you're talking about wastewater treatment, you're talking about what specific?
Exactly, yeah. Wastewater treatment, clean-up processes.
Right. And also policy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And regulation.
That's
by
right.
The government.
Yeah, and the thing that we want to emphasise is that if you want to make a difference, you've got to get on with it. But we have to be patient. It takes a long time to see the outcomes from that. So that was the Thames. The Thames reflected, if you like, industrial control of the phosphorus. And then we have the other rivers, which have a slightly different story. Maybe if I can ask Steve here, who to talk about the river from the United States.
Yeah, sure. So the Maumee Basin is the primary source of phosphorus to Lake Erie, one of the Laurentian Great Lakes, which has been a hot spot for water quality concerns for quite some time. And unlike the Thames, the monitoring record for phosphorus in the Maumee River and also fertilizer use in agricultural flows, it doesn't go back quite as long. But nonetheless, in assembling these data, starting in the mid-1970s and bringing things up to around 2010, we see a broad-scale decline in the rate of accumulation of phosphorus within this large basin. And it's a similar sized basin to the Thames, but far fewer people. So we're enabled with some simplifications we can make in the Maumee due to its primarily agricultural land use context.
Agriculture.
And so there were also interventions that lowered this or helped deplete this phosphorus in soil. Are those mostly agricultural practices, or what was the story there?
Yeah, that's right. So we do have the city of Toledo near the mouth of the Maumee, right along the shores of Lake Erie. But what we're talking about here is information for just upstream of Toledo. So we're not talking about wastewater treatment so much in this case. It's an intensively and extensively agricultural river basin.
So what that shows then, what the Maumee shows in contrast to the Thames, it shows it's a great success story about agricultural practices to reduce phosphorus emissions. And what your data shows from there, Steve, then is the reduction in phosphorus as a result of agricultural improvements to reduce the phosphorus over the long term in the Maumee. So we've got the Thames reduction with sewage, wastewater, the Maumee with agricultural reductions, and then we move to my colleague Jianbo and your famous data set from the Yangtze Basin in China.
Yes, Yangtze Basin is a quite different story. So Yangtze River is the longest river in China. So it's also center of the economy and the society of China. So Chinese government pay much attention to the sustainable development in the Yangtze River Basin. So this year they released the national strategy to develop the Yangtze River Basin economic belt or economic zone. So this is a national strategy, how to develop this area. So which is very, very important for the whole China, to support the whole China sustainable development. So for Yangtze River area is very, very intensive farming system. The agriculture is very, very intensive in the basin. So the yield is very high productivity, but also very high input of the chemical fertilizer, pea fertilizer. So from the figure, you can see the balance is very, very positive. And with the time, it increased very much, rapidly, and then accumulate large amount of the phosphate in the catchment.
Yeah. So what it shows then is a contrast to the Thames,
yes,
to the Maumee. It shows a long-term increase in the phosphorus over the accumulation over the period in question that was studied in the data from the 1970s, you determined in that river, up until around about present day.
Yes.
So the message there in the Yangtze, I think, is that it again reflects this long term, this legacy, but it shows that even if the government put in the best practice today, and it sounds like things are improving, it's going to be a while until we see a recovery, a turnaround, a change in the Yangtze. But nonetheless, we shouldn't lose heart, because what our work has shown is this legacy effect. It is a long-term response that we need to be interested in, and the things that we do today will have improvements in the future, but we need to be patient to see things change.
So were there any shortcomings you found in your study? Were there problems with the data sets, anything like that?
Steve, you're the expert there.
Oh, there are always problems. One lesson related to this is, the glass is half full in this case. We were empowered with the Thames and the Maumee information. These happen to be two of the most exceptionally well monitored rivers in the US and the UK, and really, frankly, the world, and specifically for phosphorus. So we knew that going into this before we put all that information together, and we're empowered by that. So this is, on the flip side, we haven't accomplished that everywhere in the world yet, despite really rapid ongoing land use change and population growth in certain parts of the world. And so this is, in a lot of ways, this is a bit of a call for monitoring and sustained monitoring to capture the long-term stories. We need that before we can assemble these sorts of records for other types of rivers, including the Yangtze.
Yeah, the data's hard to get. It was tough, wasn't it? But we got it, and we did a good job pulling it all together. And we need more of that data. We need long-term monitoring, don't we? That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, great job to all of you on a fantastic paper. It was a very interesting read, and I recommend it to everyone watching.
Yeah. Great team, these guys and all the other authors as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.